Markets don't reward desire. They reward funded positions held through time with survivable risk. If your cash flow can't reliably feed the position and your liquidity buffer can't absorb volatility, compounding doesn't get a chance to operate. Saving your first $100,000 before 30 is not primarily an investment return problem. It's a cash flow, incentives, and risk of ruin problem. So we're going to treat your personal finances like a small fund. You have capital inflows, operating costs, liquidity needs, and a risk budget, and you either run it professionally or you blow up. Here's the core mechanic, straight from how markets work. Price moves are noisy in the short run, but capital allocation and time horizon are structural. A trading desk doesn't start by picking the hottest ticker. It starts by defining its mandate, drawdown limits, and funding conditions. Your mandate is simple: accumulate liquid net worth to $100,000 by a fixed date. Your funding condition is your income after tax. Your drawdown limit is the maximum setback you can tolerate without derailing the plan, because a large drawdown early doesn't just hurt your portfolio, it destroys your ability to keep contributing. Now the biomechanics, the drivers that actually determine whether you get there. Incentives. Your life is engineered to increase consumption as income rises, so your default setting is lifestyle inflation. Cash flow. Most people in their 20s have unstable income, high transition costs, and irregular expenses that behave like volatility spikes. Rates. When risk-free yields are high, liquidity has real return. When they're low, people reach for yield and take hidden risk. Liquidity. If you don't have accessible cash, any surprise expense forces you to sell investments at the worst time. Volatility. The market will offer you drawdowns as a fee for long-term returns, and your behavior under that stress is the real edge. Positioning. Your portfolio includes your job skills, your debt, your housing, your car payment, your subscriptions. Those are positions too, and most are short volatility in disguise. Strategically, this matters because $100,000 by 30 is a tight time horizon. With a tight horizon, your primary lever is savings rate, not alpha. People misunderstand this because they think one good year in the market can substitute for disciplined cash flow. In reality, for most earners, the first $100,000 is built by consistent contributions and avoiding major setbacks, not by heroic returns. You don't need to be brilliant, you need to be unkillable. So let's apply it like we're in a private investment lab with a position book open. You start by stabilizing funding and liquidity because in markets the first job is to stay in the game. You take your monthly net income and you separate it into 3 streams: operating expenses, liquidity reserve contributions, and investable contributions. The liquidity reserve is not optional, it's your margin requirement. If you have zero buffer and you're all in the market, you're leveraged even if you don't use margin, because life will force liquidation. You build that reserve until it covers the realistic shocks your 20s will throw at you: job transitions, medical gaps, relocation, car repairs. While you're building it, you still invest a small, consistent amount so you're not waiting for a perfect moment, but your priority is removing forced sell risk. Once your liquidity is stable, you set the accumulation engine, a default monthly buy program into broad, low-cost exposure that matches your time horizon. You're not trying to outsmart volatility, you're trying to harness it. If the market drops 10 to 20%, your response is not panic, and it's not bravado. Your response is to keep your buy program running because your objective is shares accumulated, not headlines conquered. If the market runs up and everyone is euphoric, your response is also to keep the buy program running because you are not timing, you are funding. The signal you care about is not, is it up today? It's, did my cash flow show up on schedule? Because that is what compounds. Now we layer decision logic because you still need rules. Your base position sizing is determined by how sensitive you are to drawdown. If a 30% portfolio drawdown would cause you to stop contributing, you are oversized. So you size your risky assets so that a normal bear market does not break your behavior. That might mean starting with a conservative allocation until your liquidity and confidence are real, then gradually taking more equity risk as your contribution habit is hardened. Entry logic is boring on purpose. You enter through automation. Paycheck hits, money routes, purchases happen. Exit logic is equally boring. You don't sell because the chart is scary. You sell when money is needed for near-term obligations, and you plan those obligations ahead so you're not selling under pressure. If rates rise and cash yields become meaningful, you respond by improving your cash management instead of chasing speculative returns. You ladder safe yields for planned expenses and keep your risk assets for the long horizon portion. If rates fall and risk assets inflate, you respond by refusing to let the market's mood rewrite your savings plan. If volatility spikes, you respond by shrinking the part of your strategy that requires emotional discretion and expanding the part that runs on rules. Most failures happen right here. Overconfidence after a few green months leads you to increase risk at the top. Chasing the latest winner replaces process with adrenaline. Poor risk control turns one bad year into a multi-year recovery. Ignoring time horizon causes you to invest money you actually need in 6 to 18 months, and then you blame the market for doing what markets do. Let's make the math explicit, because this is where the myth breaks. To reach $100,000 by 30, you usually need a combination of high savings rate, steady income, and time. If you're starting at 22 with $0, you need roughly 8 years. Even with decent market returns, you're still looking at contributions on the order of hundreds to low thousands per month, depending on your income and expenses. That's why most people miss it, not because they're lazy, but because their cash flow is constrained and their spending increases with income. The market can help, but it cannot replace a missing contribution stream. Your job is to engineer the contribution stream. Here's where most people stop, but here's the advanced layer. Markets don't just move, regimes change. In some regimes, stocks and bonds diversify nicely. In others, correlations rise and everything falls together because liquidity is being withdrawn. If you build your plan assuming diversification means I'm safe, you can still get hit when correlations break. Your defense is not magical allocation, it's risk of ruin math and liquidity discipline. Risk of ruin is simple. If there's a path where one bad sequence of events forces you to sell and stop contributing, your probability of hitting $100,000 by the deadline collapses. Sequence risk matters more than average return in a short horizon. A 50% drawdown doesn't just require a 100% gain to recover, it also costs you time, and time is the one asset you can't refinance. So you treat leverage, formal or informal, as radioactive until after you cross that first $100,000. You avoid concentrated bets that can set you back multiple years. You respect liquidity traps. The moment you need cash is often the moment the market offers the worst prices. That's why your reserve and your planned expense ladder are part of the strategy, not conservative accessories. You also watch behavioral traps that appear in every regime. During slow bull markets, you drift into complacency and spend more. During sharp corrections, you either freeze contributions or double risk impulsively. Both are regime-dependent errors, and both are solved with pre-committed rules. Now we integrate this into a trainable skill, because knowing isn't the same as executing. You build a simple process. Each month you record 3 numbers like a portfolio manager. You track your savings rate as a percentage of net income, your invested capital, how much principal you've actually deployed, and your liquidity coverage, months of expenses in reserve. You journal deviations. Any month you didn't follow the plan, you write the trigger and the fix. You run mini backtests, not to optimize returns, but to stress test behavior. You simulate a year where the market drops 25% early, then recovers slowly. You simulate a job interruption. You simulate a surprise expense. Your plan must survive those simulations without requiring heroics. Retention comes from rules and review loops. You set a quarterly review where you rebalance your life positions, subscriptions, rent, car costs, debt interest, anything that steals funding from contributions gets examined like a fee. You combine tools the way real desks do. Valuation tells you what you're paying, Macro tells you what the environment is doing to rates and liquidity, technicals tell you volatility and trend conditions, and risk management tells you whether you can survive being wrong. Under pressure, you test with paper trading if you're experimenting, but you size real experiments so small they can't damage the mission. You run pre-mortems. You write down the 3 ways you could fail to hit $100,000 by 30, and you build safeguards against each. If you re-watch this, don't replay it for motivation. Replay it to catch the one logic chain that matters. Liquidity prevents forced selling. Forced selling creates sequence risk. Sequence risk destroys contribution compounding, and contribution compounding is what builds the first $100,000. That chain is the whole lab.